Hi, Kurt Repanshek. Welcome to National Parks Traveler, very first webinar. We're hoping to do this on a monthly basis going ahead. There's lots of news, interviews, and insights from the national parks that we hope to bring you over the coming months. With the visitation rocketing across public lands and specifically the national park system in the past few years, we thought it only made sense to try and give you some tips on some parks that aren't going to be so crowded and where you can actually find some solitude and great atmosphere to build a list of new favorites in the national park system. And before we get into some of our guests that we've asked to join us to help you learn about those parks, I want to put out some numbers for you. There are 423 units in the national park system from coast to coast, all the way out to the Western Pacific and National Park of American Samoa, and to the Caribbean with the Virgin Islands National Park, and of course up to Alaska and down to the Mexican border. But there are just 63 quote unquote national parks. And in recent weeks, a lot of other media have been talking about overlooked units of the national park system, and they've just kind of focused on those 63 national parks, which is kind of a mistake in my mind, because there are so many wonderful other units of the national park system that really deserve some attention and some inspection and even some love. And last year, across the national park system, there were roughly 300 million visitors to those parks. And amazingly, half of those visitors, roughly 150 million of those visitors, went to just 25 national parks. When you realize there are 423 units in the national park system, you can understand why there's some crowding issues going on across the national park system. Now, to help me point out some of these wonderful other parks in the national park system, I've invited Traveler's contributing editor, Kim O'Connell. She's been writing for the Traveler for quite a few years, and she's well familiar with national parks. And I've also got Rene Agredano, who is a full-time RVer. She and her husband, Jem, have been full-time RVer since 2007, and she's my go-to person for information on the RV perspective in exploring the national parks. So Kim and Rene, welcome to our first webinar.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
So I thought we'd start with Arizona. Just because there are so many units in Arizona, aside from that one that we all have heard of. I think it's called, what is it, Grand Canyon National Park?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. If you look over my shoulder, you will see that the background is the painted desert of Petrified Forest National Park down in Arizona. And it's one of my favorite units in Arizona, both because of the great rough landscape you have there and all the petrified woods and the petrified trees that you find there. There's some Western history there. Route 66 passed right through there. It's just a great overlooked park in the national park system. The one drawback is that it closes at sundown and doesn't open until sunrise the next day, and that is largely to, I'm guessing, prevent people from feeling a great opportunity to take some of that petrified wood for themselves. But Arizona is, there's just so much history there in cultural history, Western history, volcanism, archaeology, and one of my favorite places, aside from Petrified Forest National Park, if you fly into Flagstaff, and I know Kim O'Connell's been in Flagstaff and she's visited, there's a clutch of national monuments right around Flagstaff that you can make a week's tour out of them, between Walnut Canyon, Wapatki, Montezuma Castle, and Sunset Crater Volcano National Monument. You've been to those places, haven't you, Kim?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've been to all of them, but definitely Walnut Canyon and Wapatki. And I saw those several years ago as part of a kind of a big 2-week tour of the Southwest. I live on the East Coast. This is Shenandoah National Park and pictured behind me. So it was a really special trip to go out with my dad, and we traveled all around these national parks. And my dad was a big parks enthusiast, and he liked to get off the beaten path. Actually, he liked to find solitude, and so that's kind of, I got a taste of that. So he said, let's try these small national parks. And what I really liked about them is that you got, in the big desert of the Southwest, you have a sense of intimacy in these small places. You can kind of understand the landscape in a smaller park that's less visited. You're less sort of distracted by all the noise and concessions and crowds. And I know another park I think you were going to mention is Canyon de Chelly, is another national monument down there, beautiful Red Rock Canyon. And it's a very kind of a narrow canyon. It's really beautiful. And so these places are very, very special. And one thing I particularly remember about these smaller national parks in Arizona is that, coming from the East Coast, it was the first time I ever heard true natural quiet. And if you live in a city, you're used to that white noise that's always around you in an urban area. It's just the constant hum of traffic and, you know, construction and things. And I don't really hear it anymore until it's not there. And the first time I went to these smaller national parks in Arizona, I remember just standing on the side of the road, drinking in the solitude and drinking in the natural quiet, which I had literally never heard before. And I know it sounds funny to say I'm hearing natural quiet, but just the total absence of artificial noise. And it was part of the beauty of the experience for me. So it was really incredible to go to those parks.
You know, one thing I want to point out as we go along during the next 45 or 50 minutes or so is a lot of these parks are not necessarily destination parks, quote unquote, because Petrified Forest, for instance, does not have any lodging inside the park boundaries. Frankly, I'd like to see them bring the Painted Desert Inn back into operation, but I'm not sure the Park Service is going to agree with me on that. However, as we go across the country, you'll see that a lot of the parks that we point to are in clusters. And so with the monuments we just were discussing in the Flagstaff area, you know, you can have a base camp in Flagstaff or Sedona and make day trips out to these parks. If you go towards Petrified Forest, nearby that is Canyon de Chelly National Monument, a fantastic place. There is a lodge there, the Thunderbird Lodge. Also nearby is Hubble Trading Post National Historic Site, where you can get the flavor of how an Indian trading post actually operated. In fact, when it was added to the park system back in the 60s, I believe, George Herzog, who at the time was the National Park Service director, pretty much insisted that it would continue to be an actual Indian trading post. And so you can go there and there's just some beautiful, beautiful handcrafted jewelry, of course, Navajo rugs. And so you get this mix between, you know, you can see Petrified Forest, you can see Hubble Trading Post, you can go up to Canyon de Chelly, which is a incredible experience. Rene, you've probably been in parts of Arizona. Have you ever got down to Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument?
Oh gosh, yes, I have. That is such a great place to go in winter. And Kim, you were talking about natural silence, just like raw, unfiltered silence. And that I have heard so many times in Arizona. I have heard silence that was so loud, it made your ears hurt. And right. Yeah, and I had never heard that before either, because I grew up in LA. So Arizona, you know, has always been a place that I've always gone back to for that kind of solitude. Organ Pipe is one of those places. It is the most gorgeous place to go in the late winter, early spring, when the desert cactuses are blooming, and we just loved it. And as an RVer, the fact that there's camping in the park is a bonus. It's one thing that we always look for because we're lazy and we take our house with us. I don't want to, but sometimes I do make a base camp and branch out, like we have been to Patki and all of those places after while we were camping in Flagstaff. But yeah, Organ Pipe is one of them, and Northern Arizona, there's so much to see, and it's just one of the reasons why we've been on the road for so long, because there's just no end to it. It's wonderful.
You know what I would Sorry,
Yeah.
Kurt, I was just going to add, I would never tell someone to not go see the Grand Canyon in their lifetime. By all means, you should go see the Grand Canyon. It is undeniably magnificent. But when I went to the Grand Canyon, I remember feeling that it was a bit overwhelming, and I almost preferred the smaller canyons and the smaller parks that were nearby, because you had some of the similar flavor, similar landscape. You could kind of still understand the geology and the nature and the plants that were around there, but in a way that was a little bit more to scale, and I could understand it a little bit more. And I didn't quite feel like so overwhelmed by the vastness of the canyon. I mean, the Grand Canyon is incredible. It's impressive, but unless you're going to really hike down into it, it's kind of hard to get your arms around. So, I like going to a smaller park where you can get some of the flavor of a larger park, but without the massive crowds and the long lines and all the crowding that we've talked about.
Yeah. One other thing I want to add, and we could almost spend the whole show talking about the monuments around Flagstaff, but a lot of them are woven together, because Sunset Crater Volcano National Monument, there was a culture living there before the volcano erupted. And when that volcano erupted, it forced them north to Wupatki National Monument, the landscape now occupied by Wupatki National Monument. And learning about the volcanism, the geology that went on there, as well as how the native cultures responded, is really, really fascinating. And if you go over to Walnut Canyon, you actually hike down into this canyon that they made their homes in, and you can see some of the cliff dwellings that they had there. And it's just a wonderful place. You could spend, a long time just exploring those 4 parks right there. And of course, Tuzigoot National Monument is nearby as well. Why don't we jump across the country? And I'm not sure. Massachusetts, should we pick Massachusetts up and talk about parks there? I know one place that is really kind of fascinating, both from a literary standpoint as well as from an American history standpoint, is New Bedford Whaling National Historic Site. Just because it was one of the busiest whaling ports in America back in the 18th century, 19th century. And of course, Herman Melville not only went out on a whaling ship from New Bedford, but he also sat there in the Seaman's Bethel and was inspired to write Moby Dick.
Yeah, I think when people think about going to national parks on their summer vacation, they naturally, like you said, go to the big natural areas, the areas that are really known for their natural scenic beauty. But what I've found, especially living on the East Coast, is that a lot of these historic sites give you the best of both worlds. They're both scenic and beautiful. There might be along a waterway or something like that, but then they also have all this culture and history. So you get this incredible, rich experience, visiting a national park site, even though it might not be one of the big name national parks. There's so many places like that on the East Coast, particularly, but across the system too.
They really are. And in 2026, we're going to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the United States coming into being. And you go up and down the East Coast, and there are just dozens and dozens of park sites that help protect Revolutionary War sites and help interpret the history. I grew up in New Jersey, my formative years back in the last century, and I'd heard about Morristown, but I never really put it together, as in this was General Washington's headquarters. And you can go visit Morristown National Historical Park and see the house where he spent the winter, and Martha came up and spent time with him. And not too far away is Jockey Hollow, where the colonial soldiers built their log cabins to spend the winter. And of course, the best time to go would be in the winter, so you could try and experience what those soldiers experienced, although we haven't had a cold winter like that in a long time. But you can just go up the coast and run into dozens of Revolutionary War sites. We've got a story coming out on a Traveler, one of our contributing writers, in Boston National Historical Park. And people might go to Boston and say, we're going to go down to Cape Cod National Seashore, a wonderful place. My parents retired there, so I spent a lot of summers in Cape Cod. But if you stay right there in Boston, you've got the Freedom Trail and you've got the Black Heritage Trail. And I can tell you from reading this writer's story that's going to appear in The Traveler, phenomenal history is told there that often is overlooked because we're not aware of these places.
You basically can't go anywhere without tripping on an historic site on the East Coast. And I'm still a newbie to the East Coast. We don't get out there very often, but the times that we have been out there, I was just amazed. Like we went to visit friends in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and oh my God, they're everywhere. The battlefield monuments and everything. You could spend so much time as an RVer just setting up a base camp somewhere and just branching out with like an hour-long drive, maybe if that.
You mentioned Fredericksburg, and I have a brother who lives in Fredericksburg, and so I visited there a lot. And Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park is a phenomenal place. It's got some great Civil War history. You can see where Stonewall Jackson was shot by his own men. You can see the shrine where he died. Nearby is Petersburg National Battlefield, and again, literary. Douglas Fraser, I believe, was the author of Cold Mountain. Came to screen with Nicole Kidman and Jude Law, and I forget the other actress. But anyway, Petersburg really struck me. Just because it's so rich in history, and if you're familiar with the story about the explosion there that was aimed to kill the rebel troops that were waiting, but my brother and I had driven up there. We had visited Cape Lookout and Cape Hatteras National Seashores with some friends, and ended up in Petersburg, and we took his granddaughters, and lo and behold, we turned one corner in the park on the Park Drive, and here was a reenactment, a Civil War reenactment that they were making for a Discovery TV show. Just so much rich history back east. But Rene, I know you base yourself largely in the western half of the country, Mississippi West. Where do you like to go to escape the crowds with your RV?
Oh gosh, we're usually in the Southwest in winter, and then we move north in summer. And right now we're on our way to Oregon. But last year we discovered Dinosaur National Monument, and I'd seen it on the map for years, and it just happened to be kind of near where we were going. And that's going to be one of my all-time favorite places to go back to now, just because you really want to have to go there. There we are. And we showed up without a reservation, just kind of hoping and praying that, we'd get in, and we did. And it wasn't crowded, which was a huge surprise. This was the week after Labor Day. We were actually just kind of making a loop, and it was totally worth it. Wide open spaces. The dinosaur bones exhibits there in the visitor center blew us away. They were so incredible. You could actually go up and touch the bones. They wanted you to touch them, which was like, I felt like a kid in a children's museum. The hiking trails were amazing. My husband and I were the only ones on this one trail. It wasn't even a hot day or anything. It wasn't that early, but it was just so nice to be able to get in there. You go down into some canyons and back up to some amazing lookout points. Just so much to see and do there. I wish we could have stayed longer, but the big problem with Dinosaur is there's no dump station in the park. So we could only stay as long as our RV tanks could hold out. And we left after a week, but we'll be back for sure.
Dinosaur is incredible, Rene. And I've been rafting the rivers there, the Yampa River and the Green River down through the Gates of Lador several times, at least on both of those. And some years ago, I wrote a story about why isn't Dinosaur National Monument a national park, because it's got world-class paleontological remains there. It's got these two world-class whitewater rivers. It's got
Mhm.
Western history to it. It's got just outstanding beauty. And I guess one of the reasons it's well, one of the reasons it's not a national park is that, you know, there's some opposition among the local communities there. There's grazing on the within the national monument, I believe,
Mhm.
and hunting as well, and they don't want to see that go away. But the way more and more national monuments and historic sites are being promoted to be designated as national parks, in some aspects, that's the kiss of death. So if you haven't been to national park, if you haven't been to Dinosaur National Park, I'd strongly second Renee's suggestion to go visit now, because it really is a phenomenal place.
Oh, I totally agree. You know, the history that you mentioned, learning about Josie Bassett. I didn't know she existed. I didn't know anything about her. And they have this cabin of hers, this woman built on her own I think she was like in her 70s when she built it with one of her sons. And, you know, she was a cattle woman. She raised cattle while she was there. And I picked up a book on her. And I loved it. I hope it stays not quite as discovered as other places for a while.
Yeah, she had her place in Browns Park, I believe.
Yeah.
That has some famous outlaw history there. A lot of the outlaws would retreat to that place in the wintertime, I think, to stay away from the law. And I believe Butch and Sundance went.
Mm-hmm.
Don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I've gone through my history of Dinosaur and Browns Park, but it's a true gem. It really is out there. Now, let me ask you, Renee, have you and your husband ever made it up to Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota?
You know, had I known that it was such a cool place, we might have gone there when we went to the Badlands. So we went to Badlands and blew right past it. I'll go back there though, because I love that area. And from what I have heard, there's been so much development with the oil and gas industry in that general area that I kind of want to go see it soon, just because I hear that it's changed in that part of the country. But I do want to check it out. I've never been there.
I believe Kim's been there.
Have you?
Been there. I have been there. So Theodore Roosevelt National Park, I was there in 2018, and it's in western North Dakota. And I remember when we first got there, I thought, this is the best kept secret in the entire national park system. It reminded me of other national parks, and yet more solitude. Because it has, it's a Badlands topography. Actually, it's also a Badlands. Actually, it has the same kind of buttes and the striated rock formations and the prairies and the plateaus. It is still what they call a Badlands topography. But Badlands National Park in South Dakota, being closer to Mount Rushmore, gets, you know, over 1 million visitors a year. I think this park gets more like 500 or 600,000 years, or 600,000 visitors a year, far, far less than Badlands National Park gets, but just as beautiful, if not more so. I mean, this park is incredibly beautiful. And then for those who want to go see bison at Yellowstone, well, there's bison herds at Theodore Roosevelt without the long lines and, you know, the crowds at Old Faithful. I mean, of course, Yellowstone is an amazing place, but if you want to go see a beautiful Western landscape with free roaming bison herds, they're there at Theodore Roosevelt. It was really a stunning location, and it really was a really incredible surprise for us.
No, it's a wonderful place. And if you start your visit at Medora, North Dakota, at the visitor center there, they have one of Theodore Roosevelt's cabins from the Maltese Cross Ranch, I believe. And it's really pretty small. I've been in there, and they still have some of the original furnishings there. But it is, you know, for American history and the conservation movement, to see the landscape that so struck Theodore Roosevelt and really was his primer for being a conservationist, or as much as a late 19th century, early 20th century politician could be. And to understand, I mean, he was there in 1883 and 1884. He wanted to go out west and toughen himself up. And he certainly, got what he was looking for in Badlands with that topography and geology and the harshness of it all. And it was a place that he retreated to when his wife and his mother died within 2 days of each other. His wife after giving birth, and he retreated out there and tried to get over that tremendous loss. And I just can't imagine it, but beautiful park, north unit and a south unit. That's Badlands National Park. It's a beautiful park, and there is a lot of development. The fracking industry is going full bore in that part of North Dakota, and there are some night sky light problems from the flaring of gas up there. And if you go, you really have to be careful on the roads, because some of those big tanker trucks and oil field trucks really fly down those highways. But if you do go, Medora is a great base camp, and not too far north of Theodore Roosevelt National Park is Fort Union Trading Post National Historic Site, which is another cute little jewel. I mean, you're not going to spend a lot of time there. You could spend a half a day there, but it dates back to the fur trading days, and it's right there on the Missouri River. The fort you see today is a replica of the original one, but you certainly get the feel of the frontier and how a fur trading post operated. And then to the east of Theodore Roosevelt, a little bit farther away in eastern, east central North Dakota, is Knife River Indian Villages National Historic Site. And this is also on the Missouri River, but it was a Native American camp area, the Mandans and the Hitatsus, if I pronounce that correctly. And in I think I had a note somewhere around here, in the fall of 1806, Lewis and Clark came up the river, and the weather was getting bad, so they pulled in and they set up a camp there of their own and spent the winter there. And you can go to Knife River Indian Villages, and they've got a few of the earth lodges, replica earth lodges that the native cultures used to get through the winters there, and you can go inside them, and there's some great interpretation there. It's another really great unit of the national park system. Again, you probably won't spend more than a half day there unless you can talk the rangers somehow to take you inside and show you some of their museum collection that's still tucked away. Fortunately, I had that opportunity, and they've just got some beautiful, beautiful artifacts from years ago. Which way you want to go? Rene, what about more of your travels in the West?
Well, I'm always looking for new places. And to prepare for this conversation, I was looking at the visitor statistics section of the Park Service website. And I'm like, okay, what places with RV camping are ranked for the least amount of visitors? And one that really surprised me is North Cascades National Park. So over in the Pacific Northwest, I was shocked that it only gets about 18,000 visits a year. And Kurt, I'm not sure, does the Park Service count a visit as an overnight, or just like literally just going through the gates and out again?
Just going through the gates. And I'm sorry,
yeah.
What did you say the visitor count was?
17,855. It's ranked number 323. So it is way down there. You look surprised?
Well, it seems low. It seems low.
It does seem low.
It's a great place. It's got 2 NRAs attached to it.
Yeah.
Some of the most beautiful, beautiful alpine territory in the United States. I haven't been there myself. It's long been on my to-do list, but I've seen lots of pictures from it, and it certainly grabs you, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I'll let you know, because we're going to be in the Northwest all summer, and that is definitely on my list. One of the things I liked about it is that it has, it's big rig RV friendly. So I don't have a big rig. Our fifth wheel is only 27 feet, but for the people with the larger ones out there are some pretty large camping spaces in that park. And a lot of it is no reservations. So you just, you kind of have a plan B if you decide to go out there. But I'm going to check it out, and I'll let you know.
Yeah, please do, please do. You know, I'm gonna jump back to South Dakota. I'm sorry, it slipped my mind while I got so excited about North Dakota. But you know, Kim, you mentioned Badlands, and Jesse had popped up a photo of Badlands. You know, you've got Badlands National Park, which is phenomenal, both because of the landscape there, and you've got bison there. You've got Native American culture there in the South Unit. Not too far away, you've got Wind Cave National Park, which is a small park. I think it's only 35,000 acres. But again, it's got some great Western history. It also has bison. There's a longer story about bison between these parks that we've mentioned that we don't have time to go into here. But you've got the cleft in the hillside that was the impetus for naming Wind Cave National Park, because under the right atmospheric conditions, they've actually measured gusts of 70 miles an hour, 70 miles per hour coming out of that little cleft. And for the Lakota Sioux, there's some really great stories of what that cleft represents in their culture and bringing life onto the surface from the subterranean. And so you've got Badlands National Park, you've got Wind Cave National Park. Don't tell anybody, but Jewel Cave National Park just up the road is one of my favorites. I mean, if you like going underground, if you like going into caves, Jewel Cave is a great place to go. I had a great time during my stay there. This little block here, you can go wild caving, basically off the beaten path in some of these national parks that have caves. And this picture here is out in the visitor center, and the patio by the visitor center, they've got this cement box that is, there it is, and it's about 8.5 inches tall and maybe 2 feet wide. And they want you to be able to crawl through that to go on their wild cave tour. Now, I was on a wild cave tour at Mammoth Cave National Park. And I don't recall space that tight, but I have been in other parks on BLM grounds where it was pretty tight. But it's really a beautiful park, and you got Mount Rushmore right next door, so you can put together a week easily visiting Wind Cave, Jewel Cave, Mount Rushmore, and Badlands National Park. Just phenomenal places that are largely overlooked for some reason.
They are. I'm embarrassed to admit that we blew right past Wind Cave. I had no idea it was so cool.
That must have been before you knew about National Parks Traveler.
It was. It absolutely was.
Let's jump over to the other side of the country. I mean, I love water. I grew up in New Jersey. We would take our vacations down to the Jersey coast. I would get sunburned. I'm going to have problems with skin cancer down the road probably. But we've got national seashores, and a lot of people are familiar with Cape Cod, which I mentioned earlier. A lot of people are familiar with Cape Hatteras, Padre Island National Seashore. To me, my favorite is Cape Lookout National Seashore, also on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, just south of Cape Hatteras. You can take a ferry between the two. And the nice thing that I enjoy about Cape Lookout National Seashore is it's a wild seashore. You're out on this barrier island. There's no towns on the barrier island. There's no hotels, no restaurants. There's some shacks, basically fishing shacks that are made out of plywood and struts. And it's really a peaceful existence. And you can go down there and you can, if you're lucky enough, rent one of the shacks. They've got grills with them. They do have some plumbing, so it's not totally roughing it. But there were 4 of us. We shared one of the shacks. We were cooking steaks and whatnot on the grill outside. The seagulls were perched by the dozen on the roof waiting for us to drop something. When we turned our back, they tried to steal something off the grill. Really interesting bird life there. But it's such a beautiful setting, and you can drive down the beach with your vehicle if you're well familiar with how to drive on the sand. There's the Cape Lookout Lighthouse. You can climb up to the top there and get a beautiful perspective. You can go sea kayaking either on the sound side of the barrier island, or if you're good enough, if you're skilled enough, out in the open ocean, and then pitch your tent between the dunes out there. And it's a totally otherworldly experience than what you encounter at Cape Hatteras or Cape Cod National Seashores. You
I
know,
haven't been to Cape Lookout, but I've been to Cape Hatteras a lot. And so you've got me really excited to try Cape Lookout, Kurt. So
you have to try it. You do, you really do. And you can do a day trip and go out to Shackleford Banks, where they've got a wild population of horses out there, banker horses that might have dated back to the Spanish Spanish explorers coming and sea wrecks that, you know, the horses got loose that way. You know, another soft place in my heart is for Fort Laramie National Historic Site. There are a number of Civil War era forts across the national park system. The interesting thing about Fort Laramie is I think it's arguably the first fort that went up, and it dates back to the fur trading days when the beaver trade was starting to peter out, and the two guys who set up the fort realized that it might be better to have one place where the fur trappers and the Indians could bring their pelts to, rather than you know, doing a rendezvous type of situation that they long had done in Western Wyoming. And Fort Laramie kind of grew up from there, and it eventually turned into a military outpost. It was a key spot along the Oregon Trail. And as a friend of mine described it, it was the 19th century analogy of today's truck stops, because there was so much traffic going through there, and there were so many different cultures. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize. You know, some people might say, well, you know, the National Park Service is seeking diversity. Why would anybody go to Fort Laramie if there weren't Caucasian? And when you look into the history of Fort Laramie, I mean, you had Blacks, you had Mexicans, you had Germans, you had Irish. I mean, it was a melting pot of travelers and traders and merchants. And it was just phenomenal history. Really was, really is there. And that's a shot of one of the barracks there, and you can see it set up. And Rene, I'm afraid there's not a campground there.
Oh, darn. I'm sure there's one nearby.
there is one nearby. And of course, there's the Guernsey Ruts. If you've never been along the Appalachian Trail, or not the Appalachian Trail, boy, that kind of got swayed west. The Oregon Trail in Guernsey, Wyoming, just to the west, I believe, of Fort Laramie, are some of the deepest ruts you'll see across the Oregon Trail. It's not a national park site; it's a state park site, but it's worth. If you're going to Fort Laramie, you have to stop at the Guernsey Ruts. And for many people who are driving out to see Grand Teton or Yellowstone National Park, or if you're going north up into South Dakota, it's an easy access off the interstate.
Very cool. What about the Bighorn Canyon recreation area, Kurt? Have you ever been there, or you, Kim?
I haven't.
I haven't either. I was nearby caving back in the last century, but I've been wanting to go there because I'd love to paddle. I have a sea kayak. My wife and I have sea kayaks. We've got a canoe. We just haven't made it there yet. But again, it's a very interesting national recreation area.
Yeah, one thing I liked about it was the location. If you look at the map, it's like just about halfway between Yellowstone and Devil's Tower, and that has another low visitation number. I mean, about 220,000 a year. It's ranked number 174, so it's pretty low, and there's camping there, and it just looks fabulous.
Bighorn Canyon?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you mentioned Devil's Tower, and I've been there a few times, and actually
I've been there.
one of my wife's cousins actually runs the KOA campground there. So say hi to Zanny next time you show up. Tell him Kurt at National Parks Traveler sent you.
That's exactly where we stayed, because our RV wouldn't fit in the Devil's Tower campground. So we stayed right outside the park. It was great.
Yeah. But again, you're in the Western Black Hills, and it's just a beautiful landscape and a lot of Native American cultural history there, and the different stories that revolve around Devil's Tower and what its original Native American name was, and how it got the Devil's Tower name, and the symbolism in the striated cliffs on the tower. Really interesting. And some of the odd stories that come up, such as the guy who parachuted on top of the tower, and he had to be rescued, as I recall. Yeah, Devil's Tower is a great place. I'm not so sure it's off the beaten path, but it's definitely worth going again if you're heading either to the South Dakota parks, which are very, very close nearby, or if you're going west and want to see Yellowstone and whatnot.
Yeah, I was going to mention, you mentioned kayaking. I was going to mention when you were talking about seashores, I was going to mention some of the national lake shores too. And also they're not really undiscovered. They're not really not visited, but they're less visited than parks with similar amenities and similar scenery elsewhere. What I'm thinking of specifically is Pictured Rocks National Lake Shore on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Now Pictured Rocks gets about 1 million visitors a year, which is not nothing. It's significant. But when I went to Pictured Rocks, it reminded me a lot of Acadia National Park in Maine, which gets 4 million visitors a year. If anyone goes to Acadia, and I love Acadia, it's one of my favorite national parks, but it talk about a park that's been discovered. It's, they've instituted reservation systems for Cadillac Mountain. The park road is often bumper to bumper. They shuttle a lot of visitors onto the park bus. Acadia is getting hard to get around in the summertime. And when I went to Pictured Rocks, the latitude, from Michigan to Maine of Acadia and Pictured Rocks is almost exactly the same. And so you get some similar topography. You get the mix of the, deciduous trees and the pine forest. You get the rocky, rugged coastline at Pictured Rocks that you get at Acadia. You get beautiful water, and pebble beaches like you have at Acadia, except that you have 1/4 of the annual visitation. So the park is emptier, you have more space to yourself. And then if you've ever seen pictures of Pictured Rocks, the rock formations often form these natural arches, and they're wonderful to kayak or canoe through. And you can have a really wonderful water experience there in Pictured Rocks, and a little more solitude than you would get in a similar landscape in Acadia. So that's one lakeshore that I really like.
Yeah, and it's really been discovered in the wintertime by the ice climbers.
Right.
Apparently there's some phenomenal ice formations that form there on the cliffs that really attract the ice climbers. A little bit more inland, you've got some good cross-country skiing and some snowshoeing. If you go, it might be a couple hours west. I haven't made the drive, so I can't say specifically, but Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, another great place to visit in the wintertime because of the ice caves that form there when it gets really, really cold. And I don't think it was cold enough this past winter. But not too many years ago, they had some good cold freezes that allowed people to walk into the ice caves. One place that we haven't touched, and we're getting near the end, California. There's got to be some overlooked jewels there because there's so many crowds at Sequoia and Yosemite and Death Valley. I know one place that I've been and I really liked is Lassen Volcanic National Park. People tell me that it's not totally undiscovered anymore, but it's definitely a quieter place in my view than Yosemite or Sequoia. It did have a fire go through it last year, the Dixie Fire, and it burned from south to north through the heart of the park. A lot of the western half of the park with Lassen Peak, as I understand, was untouched by the flames. Kim, you've been looking into that.
Yeah, I'm working on a story actually about some of the major fires that the Western parks have been dealing with, and some of the ways that they're fundraising and kind of creative ways that these parks are trying to raise money to go towards wildfire recovery. And Lassen Volcanic is one of them. And what's interesting is that the park was really affected by the fire. I think 70% of the park burned. But when I was talking to the folks at Lassen, they said that the park road became sort of a natural fire break, so that a lot of the front country areas of the park, the places where the visitor centers are, and a lot of the trails and things that are more accessible for park visitors were protected and were not burned. And it's more of the backcountry difficult areas of the park that were burned. So although there are closures at Lassen right now, the park is going to be open to visitors this summer. It's welcoming visitors, and they might see some burned areas, but apparently a lot of areas of the park look as they ever did. And it's a really scenically beautiful park with Lassen Peak there. So I think it's a lesser known, but becoming more popular park that actually could use a little love, because it has suffered this great catastrophe that it's still recovering from, but still plenty of beauty to be seen there, I think.
Yeah, it's got some beautiful campgrounds in that they're on lake shores.
Mhm.
You've got Lassen Peak, which is a very popular peak for hiking to the very top of it. When my one son, Sean, and I hiked to the very top some years ago, I was kind of disappointed because it was a party up on top. They carried their 6 packs of beer up there, and they had great cell coverage. So they were sending selfies across the country and chatting it up. And it wasn't exactly your peaceful area. Another interesting part of Lassen is it looks like it was taken out of Yellowstone, Bumpus Hell.
Mhm.
It's some hot springs there, and boy, they look as turquoise and aquamarine as some of the hot springs in Yellowstone. So if you want to get that Yellowstone flavor, but you don't want to go to Yellowstone, Lassen Peak is another great place to go, or Lassen National Park. I believe that the Drakesbad, there's a guest ranch there, the south central part of the park, Drakesbad, and I believe it was not burned down by the fire. The firefighters were able to set up sprinkler systems and really did a great job in keeping the flames away from Drakesbad, a guest ranch, a very popular guest ranch. I haven't had the opportunity yet, but I know a lot of people go year after year after year. It's just a beautiful setting and quiet. And I don't know, do you know, Kim, are they going to be open this year?
Yeah. Oh, that specific part?
Yeah.
Or yeah, I'm not sure about that specific part. I'd have to look into that. But the park in general will be open. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely something to look into. And, just the recovery from a forest fire is kind of interesting. I know I was on the ground in Yellowstone back in 1988 when those fires swept through there. I was reporting for the Associated Press, and I spent a couple stints there that summer. And the first one, I was shocked. I was aghast. I thought, oh my gosh, Yellowstone is just being charred to a crisp. And when I went back later in that summer, there were fires still going on, but areas of the park that had burned earlier that summer already were coming back. I mean, you saw the vegetation coming back, and it's really amazing how resilient nature can be and how quickly it can spring back. We're getting towards the end. We got about 10 minutes left. If anybody has any question, do put them in the chat room, and we'll try and answer them as best we can. Another California park that you might want to consider is Pinnacles National Park. Have you been there, Rene?
I just passed it yesterday. We were,
Turn around.
That's why we're still traveling. No, we did. We were coming up Highway 1, and there's a big exit sign. And yeah, that is one of California's least visited national park campgrounds. And there's plenty of RV friendly sites there. I would go there with a reservation though. It's right outside the Bay Area. So it's busy, but not quite as busy as other places like Yosemite.
And of course, the main attraction of Pinnacles is the geologic formations there, and it's a climbing mecca of sorts, but it's also a mecca for vultures, or condors rather. I believe they release quite a few condors for there. They bring them out of the captive breeding program and release them in Pinnacles. It's another story that's on travelers' to-do list. There's an organization out there that flies reporters over sites, and they also work with organizations for wildlife rescues. And I understand that they actually fly condors to Pinnacles to be released. And one of the writers I asked to look into that said it was a really great story, but she doesn't like small planes. Anyway, I'm looking at my list, and I think we've touched most of the places around that we
I wanted
wanted.
to say one thing, pivoting off what you just said about Lassen. I think just a general rule of thumb for visitors is to, when they're thinking about planning their summer vacation or their vacation to a national park, is that, I hope we started to talk about the breadth of the park system. If there's a particular feature or something you really want to see in a very popular park, chances are it might exist in another park that's lesser known. Like there's hydrothermal features, like Kurt said, in Lassen, and there's, the picture behind me is Shenandoah National Park, which is part of the Appalachian Blue Ridge Mountains. It's similar to Great Smoky Mountains, but Great Smoky Mountains gets 14 million visitors a year, and Shenandoah gets 1.7. So there's a lot of parks that have similar landscapes and similar features to other more popular parks. And so sometimes doing a little research, you can kind of get a similar experience with half the crowds. So
yeah, definitely. Like Rocky Mountain. I have never been there, and we're Colorado residents. But Black Canyon of the Gunnison, just over the pass, you still get that kind of Colorado experience you're looking for. And if you want to warm up a little bit, the Colorado Monument isn't that far away either.
One other good point to note is, obviously we're not going to write the Yellowstones and the Grand Tetons and the Yosemites off our list. I mean, there's still wonderful parks to go to. I try and get up to Yellowstone at least once a year. Do a different exploration of these parks. We were just down in Everglades National Park last week working on some stories, and there's a main road that goes from Homestead down to Flamingo, and people drive that road and they'll pull off onto some of the overlooks and whatnot, and then get back in the car and keep on going. We had a cypress slog, a sluice slog, where you basically park your car and you walk out into the landscape, and you have to know a little what you're doing, but if you ask at the rangers, the visitor center, they can probably direct you to some. But that goes to many national parks, is you can just park your car and go off into the landscape. I mean, you have to feel confident about what you're doing, but it's a great way to both flee the crowds and get a different experience, one with solitude where you don't have a lot of crowds around you. We're looking for some questions out there from some of our viewers. And Fossil Butte, a question about any information about Fossil Butte. It's a really interesting park in southwestern Wyoming. I know it fairly well because I spent 9 years in Wyoming and visited there not too many years ago. And the thing about it is, right in the visitor center, they've got a little section where you can actually watch technicians work on fossils and pull them out of the rock, so to speak, and slowly grind away the rock around the fossils. Right there in the visitor center, they've got a spectacular display of some of the fossils that have been found there. And of course, great history about when that part of Wyoming was underwater, a couple lakes there. I love Fossil Butte. It's again, you're not going to spend a full day there. A couple, 3 hours would be probably more than enough. Again, if you're heading up towards Yellowstone, it's just south of Yellowstone by a couple hours, few hours. A great space to stop. And of course, all these parks that we've been mentioning have websites, National Park Service websites, and so all you got to do is Google the name of your park, and it'll show up with an nps.gov URL to it, and you can find a lot of information there to help round out your trips. And of course, National Parks Traveler, we do have a growing library of places that our writers have visited, and it's a good source of information for these places. Somebody was wondering how to find new, lesser traveled parks. Be adventurous. And I say that because this summer I've got a wedding in Iowa, a family wedding to go to, and I'm going to drive there from Utah. And along the way, I looked at the routes. I can either drive I-70 through Colorado, or I can drive I-80 through Wyoming. And so I picked out 4 parks I'm going to go visit. I'm going to visit 2 on the way out, Scotts Bluff National Monument in western Nebraska, and then Homestead National Park of America in eastern Nebraska. I'm going to go to my wedding. I'm going to turn around and go through Kansas and stop at Tallgrass Prairie National Preserve, which fascinates me both because of the tallgrass prairie that once existed across much of the western half of the United States. They've got a remnant there that they protect, and there's a bison herd there. And then I'm going to go further west in Kansas to Fort Larned National Historic Site, which is another military installation from the late 19th century. And these places have interesting stories to tell. I mean, it's not always as black and white as you might assume. You know, looking at, well, Fort Larned, that's a military preserve. There's nothing there that I want to see. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But again, you know, a great way is to look at the maps and connect the dots with the National Park Service unit. That's the way I do it. How do you do it, Rene? You guys travel all over all the time.
Yeah, exactly that. We like to travel the back roads. So I look for places along 2-lane highways. And Kurt, you mentioned your route this summer. Sand Creek Massacre Site is spectacular. You have to go there if you're in that general area. It's worth a visit. So I just, those little tiny mentions on the maps, dig in, click there, look at them and see what they're all about. That's how we found some of our favorite places.
One thing I'm committed to doing this year is to bringing more attention to some of the smaller overlooked units of the national park system. I mentioned earlier in the show that we've got a nice story coming out of Boston with the Freedom Trail and the Black Heritage Trail. Phenomenal stories tied to both of those. I mean, obviously people are going to connect the Freedom Trail to the Revolutionary War, but the Black Heritage Trail has some really heart-tugging stories attached to it. Later this spring, I'm hoping to get out to Agate Fossil Beds National Monument, again in western Nebraska. And I'm pushing our writers to go farther afield, so to speak. And I know Kim is chomping at the bit to get out on the road again and visit some of those places.
Yeah, that's how I've seen a lot of parks that are off the beaten path. It's just that my family and I are big, road trippers. So when you go across this country by car, you have lots of places you want to stop. And so it's a great way to see the parks, just like you're doing, Kurt, see how many stops you could make along the way. So.
And the key, of course, is to take your time. I mean, so many people just want to, zip through the park system and say, I've been there, and take their selfie and move on. And you're doing a real disservice to yourself because there's so much to see in the national park system. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. That's our show for this month. And we will be coming forward with additional shows, like I said, hopefully one a month for the foreseeable future. Back in February of 2019, we kicked off our podcast series because here at The Traveler, we believe and understand that people consume their media in different formats. And not everybody likes to read a book or a magazine. Not everybody likes to read a website. So we kicked off our podcast series, our weekly podcast series back in February of 2019. We've done 165 consecutive weekly shows, and hopefully in a couple of years, we'll be able to say the same for our webinars. So thank you very much for watching. If you need any attention or information of our next show, keep an eye on nationalparkstraveler.org. We'll be sure to mention it and promote it just as we promoted this one. So thanks again for The Traveler. This is Kurt Repanshek. See you in the parks.